The phone attending.
Hello. 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 Amit, can you hear me? I'm not able to hear you properly. I think you're on mute.
Hello.
Amit, I can hear you now. You were on mute previously.
Okay. Now, Roshan, what I want you to do is when the meeting starts, as a part of the hosting team, I want you to tell everyone or message or how you do it that mute your side of the audio so it doesn't disturb Dr. Rajput's conversation. Once the whole presentation is over, everyone can then get time to ask questions. They raise their hand, you unmute them and they can ask their questions. Is that okay?
Sure, Amit. That is okay.
Yeah. So whenever they raise a hand, you can unmute them and they'll ask the question. You can tell them how to raise their hands after the presentation is over. Is that okay?
Okay, Amit. Sure.
Yeah. All right. So we are good to go. Have you given the admin rights to Dr. Rajput or
No. Rajput sir has not yet joined in.
has someone called him up?
Joined the meeting yet.
What's that?
I can see you on the waiting. I have added you to the current active Zoom. Gayatri Kane, right? Yeah. Okay. Let me just call up Dr. Rajput and ask him to join. Amit, just try to call Dr. Rajput sir now. His number is showing switch off. म्यूट कर दो. Hello guys, this is Roshan from Hi on. So we will start with the Zoom meeting, and Dr. Rajput sir will start with the brief and the agenda of the meeting.
Fine. Can you hear me now? Everybody, welcome to the Zoom meeting. We are doing this effort to keep ourselves busy during the Corona lockdown. And what could be better than trying to understand science better and sharing what we know with all of us? Your questions will be welcome. At the end of the meeting, we'll try to take the question answer live if possible. Otherwise, you can message us the questions and we will be able to try and reply everybody personally, individually, or we'll put answers on the group so that everybody can understand. So what we are going to do during this meeting today is discuss the non-androgenic factors that cause hair loss. Traditionally, we have been exposed only to the theory and understanding of just one factor in hair loss, which is DHT or the androgens. There are many more factors other than the androgens which need to be considered, which right now are on the rise, and addressing these factors can lead to consistent and better results in our patient management. Also, we have this factor of fear of finasteride and the side effects of finasteride. Some unscrupulous elements around the world are exploiting this fact by creating a post-finasteride syndrome, and they are trying to create a very large awareness group for the post-finasteride syndrome. We in our country have seen various quack clinics flourish right around us just on the basis of creating a fear of side effects of our medicines. Today, FDA has made it compulsory that the package insert for us should say that the side effects may continue if you discontinue the drug. I'd never seen this any time when I studied pharmacology in medical college. But if it says, the patients take it very seriously. So you could be having a patient facing infertility or erectile dysfunction, impotence, loss of libido, for various reasons, just for physical exertion, for stress, for any other reason. But once if you are prescribed finasteride, he is going to blame you for whatever happens after that, and it cannot be denied. This is in publication. This is accepted by FDA, and you cannot go and refute and say that no, this was because of some other cause, not because of the finasteride that I prescribed. So a successful person is one who has the foresight to see and prepare an option or find out answers for the problems they are facing today. So how should we get ahead in this matter? The best way is to find options other than finasteride. That is how we start coaching, because the patients are not willing to take finasteride. And when we started reading about hair loss, about the various ways in which the hair grows, we understood that initially, when male pattern hair loss was approached in the 1920s or so, you see the first classification of male pattern hair loss is in 1927. In that era, it was thought that only men lose hair. Even the understanding or classification of female pattern hair loss or female hair loss has been published in 1977. It's like a 50-year gap between the 1927 realization of male pattern hair loss and 1977 realization of the female pattern hair loss. Till then, people just thought that only males lose hair, females don't even lose hair. Naturally, male hormone was the culprit, because males are losing hair and females are not losing hair. And the study was hovering around, the focus was only on the male hormone. Treatments that we tried to come out with were focused on the end organ or the final product of the hair cycle, which is the terminal hair. We wanted to prevent miniaturization of the terminal hair. That was the treatment, the finasteride. And we wanted to promote growth of the terminal hair, so we came up with minoxidil that earlier was thought to give vasodilation. Later we know it acts as a potassium channel opener and it extends the growth of the hair. So we had better understanding. Today, with our latest research and more insights into the hair growth, we understand the hair growth cycle. We understand the entire process that goes behind making the hair. So have a strong hair that withstand all different causes. Now the focus is on creating a strong hair that can stand against any cause. That's the focus. And that is where the realization or the understanding of non-androgenic factors from DHT and androgens is going to help us. What do we find in literature? The first few publications that hold male pattern hair loss or hold DHT responsible, the title reads by Hamilton, 1942, male hormone stimulation, a prerequisite and an incident in common baldness. It never says male hormone causes baldness. It says this may be a prerequisite for causing the baldness. But we took for granted that this is the paper and this that male hormone causes baldness. The next paper was effect of castration in adolescents. Upon further changes, it puts some slowing down of further changes in proportion of the bare and hairy scalp these people had. It's proportion of the bare scalp and the hairy scalp that these people had relatively remains the same. The proportion remains. It never says they don't lose any more hair, or it never said that this causes re of hair. Later on, as the Journal of American Academy of Dermatology 1987 was the first paper where they studied androgens, testosterone, free testosterone, DHT, HEAS, and found out that there was no correlation between levels in patients having hair loss. Next, as we go a step further in this, we find reports in literature that say that pattern hair loss can occur even without DHT. So pattern hair loss has been reported in hypogonadism, hypopituitarism, reported to occur before puberty, before these hormone levels or the rise in the hormone sets in. It has been reported in complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. We know that male pattern hair loss is reported in females and female pattern hair loss could happen in males. We also have a new unpatterned hair loss, which we called as diffuse unpatterned hair loss. Various workers have tried to correlate the DHT level with the progress or the event of androgenetic alopecia and have found no correlation. Sri Kumar studied and found that there is no correlation. Veer Harper used isotope tact dilution and mass spectrometry technique in 2001, but could not correlate circulating DHT levels with hair loss. We now have questioning the usefulness of dihydrotestosterone in diagnosis of androgenetic alopecia. Actually, androgenetic alopecia does not have defined criteria for diagnosis. It's like a diagnosis of exclusion, and you're treating on clinical basis. It does not have any particular guidelines that your DHT should be above this or below this, or your so and so level should be like this. There is no, because it is not a disease. It is just slowing down of the biological cycles. This is not a sickness. So it cannot have defined criteria. Even Kyle and Sinclair in their latest update in 2000 have stated factually that there is no clinical correlation found between the onset of progress of androgenetic alopecia or hair loss and DHT. Now comes the next set of researchers who now say that it is not the DHT levels in the circulation, but the altered response of the hair follicles which is responsible for the hair loss. So now we find that the serum DHT levels no more have any value, but the way your follicle responds to the DHT or the peripheral response at the follicle level is what is the concern. So Savaya and Price, working on enzymes and various enzymatic functions in androgenetic alopecia, came down with this conclusion. Hoffman and Happel, working on the pathophysiology of androgenetic alopecia, came down with the same conclusion. Chen and Thibotot, studying the cutaneous metabolism of androgens, come down to the same conclusion. Hilmer and Hanniken, studying androgen receptor genes, again come down to the same conclusion, is that your altered follicular response to the androgens or the metabolic changes at the follicular level are what are responsible for the hair loss, not the circulating DHT levels. We also have update about the genetics. Ellis and their team have been very active in the study of genetics. In 1998 and 2001, they identified the 5 alpha reductase genes, SRD5, A1 and A2, which were located on chromosome 2 and chromosome 5, 2 different reports, but failed to show any association with androgenetic alopecia. So you identify the genes that control the 5 alpha reductase enzyme activity that converts testosterone to DHT, but it cannot be correlated with androgenetic alopecia. Later on, they said maybe it's not a single gene, but it could be a polymorphism. So they studied a polymorphism. They were extremely happy to find this polymorphism in 98.1% of all bald men. Unfortunately, they found the same polymorphism in 92% of older men and in 77% of non-bald. So though these genes, these polymorphisms, these predisposing factors are there, they could not be clinically correlated with hair loss because there are other influencing factors that determine the outcome of the genes. The genes are not totally responsible. They don't have the freedom to do whatever they like. So there is a role of additional factors which are influencing the genes. We know that now the alopecia gene comes from the mother side on the X chromosome, but clinically, you get a patient with hair loss. Everybody says, look at the father and the uncles to find out what grade of hair loss this boy will progress to. So there is not much clinical correlation going on. In earlier days, we always said that twins bald the same way. They have the same genes, they behave in the same way. Today, we have got publications by Gather Right, 2012-2013, in the Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery Journal, saying that twins do not bald the same. Now, this study was done at a congregation of twins that happens in the city of Ohio every year, where a few hundred twins just come and visit because there is a special convention of twins. And here they studied the twins, they gave them questionnaires, and they found so many twins that are not balding the same. They attribute this to epigenetic factors, the lifestyle factors. So the study concludes that age, smoking, alcohol, caffeine, dandruff, BMI, low physical activity, stress, diabetes, hypertension, smoking, multiple marriages, multiple divorce, multiple children, exposure to sunlight, so many things in the epigenetic factors could influence the outcome, and these twins are not balding the same. This was not the situation a couple of years back. Then why are we landing into this situation? We are landing because the proportion of exposure to these epigenetic factors in the recent years has increased. The pollution is increased markedly. The amount of places people travel to is increased markedly. The variation in their diet is increased remarkably. So these epigenetic factors, their sleep cycles are changing, their circadian rhythm is changing, their response to different seasons is changing. The seasons in the season cycle in nature also is changing. The humidity levels are changing. So all this is having an influence on the genetic outcome or the expression of these genes. After the genetics, your attention goes to oxidative stress. This whole thing started when lipid peroxidation, glutathione derivatives, and nitric oxide, which are indicators of oxidative stress, were found to be significantly raised in hair loss patients, reported by Girath, Carvillo in 1996, Journal of Investigative Dermatology. So this started drawing attention towards the role of oxidative stress and ROS. Antioxidants and lipid peroxidation status in blood of patients with alopecia, also again reported in year 2000. Antioxidant enzyme and lipid peroxidation in scalp of alopecia areata, reported in 2002. Evaluation of lipid peroxidation and antioxidant status in and serum nitric oxide levels, reported in 2005. So gradually the attention is going to more than one different kind of factors which are influencing the outcome of the genes and the way the follicle behaves. We know that even the World Health Organization is monitoring the influence of these factors on various diseases. These predisposing factors or the epigenetic factors we are talking of are not only influencing the outcome of hair loss, they are the predisposing factors for all diseases in the world. These are the factors responsible for increased incidence of cancers, of diabetes, of hypertension, of stress-related disorders, of early aging. There are so many things that are happening. Heart disease, coronary artery disease coming at a lower age, obesity, PCOD coming at a lower age. These are the same factors. So not surprising that you will find WHO reports on distribution and levels of pollutions around the world, distribution of stress among various populations in the world, nutritional deprivation, lack of exercise, alcohol consumption, climate change, consumption of fast food, smoking, consumption of colas. is being tracked by WHO. So these are the factors which are influencing our hair follicles. The hair follicles are expendable. They are the lowest in the functional requirement of the body. The body has always the option of not growing the hair. Even in primitive animals, the animals discontinued hair growth according to season. They shed their fur off in summer, they grew the fur back in winter. The hair follicle is a highly metabolic tissue. The metabolic turnover in the hair compared to bone marrow and epithelium. So the body does not want to waste nutrition on this hair if they're not useful. They are vestigial. So body has the option of discontinuing, slowing down, or arresting the hair growth whenever these factors are not favorable. Let's look at the pathways for hair loss. The pathways we say Wnt and DCOF1, the TGF beta, and the sonic hedgehog are pathways that regulate the hair growth right from embryogenesis to the date and the hair cycle. What do we find? These pathways that we are studying for hair loss are not specific pathways for hair loss. These are generalized pathways, mediators of inflammation and immunity in the body. These pathways are upregulated in everything right from atopic allergies to psoriasis in the body. Our androgens that we are studying are also pro-inflammatory. So the androgen blockers we use, we are having second thoughts whether these are working by blocking the androgens or these are working in fact as anti-inflammatory. Finasteride is being evaluated as an anti-inflammatory compound. Finasteride is used in hepatic encephalopathies and in renal and prostate problems as an anti-inflammatory. So we need to rethink or look at our hair loss through various angles so that we approach this problem in the best possible ways and get the best possible outcome. So the altered expression of the hair follicle that we are saying, not the DHT, but the altered metabolism or altered expression of the hair follicle is responsible for hair loss. What is this altered expression? This altered expression is the inflammation, the microinflammation, and the altered immunity. How will the cells express themselves? They will express themselves in the form of inflammation and altered immune response. The way. So can we improve inflammation and immunity by using micronutrients? Of course we can. We have got so many reports saying that omega-3 reduces inflammation in autoimmune disease. Fish oil can influence gene expression in patients. Fatty acids, polyphenols work in anti-inflammatory disease and metabolic syndrome by altering the gene transcription. We know that protein calorie malnutrition leads to reduced immunity and conditions like kwashiorkor marasmus, which can be restored back to functional immunity by replacing the loss of nutrients. Zinc has been studied in programming of the immune system. We have got two new subjects introduced in medicine, nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics, which study the effect of nutrition on genes and the gene expression. Can we improve genetic response by using nutrients? Of course we can. The DNA damage that is happening from day-to-day wear and tear or exposure to reactive oxygen species and the damage being caused to the cells. What do you require for repair of the DNA? You require amino acids, zinc, iron, copper, folic acid, B12, selenium for repairing the DNA. Study by Fruman on interactions between micronutrients, drugs, genes, and immune mechanism. There are reports by Eugenio on interactions between micronutrients, genes, inflammatory disease, and aging. Again, the same team has also studied inflammatory, immune, and antioxidant activity and its influence on genetic response. So genetic response is influenced by the level of nutrients and availability of nutrients and antioxidants in your body. And if this is not available, what the body does is slow down or arrest the hair growth and direct all important nutrients to more vital functions that are necessary for the functioning of the body. And when we replace these or antioxidants in even very low concentrations, which synergistically act and improve the efficiency despite being lower in dose, they set right the functioning of these systems, the cell functions become better, and now you are having a better outcome. Whenever these cells become weak because of the action of various toxins, ROS, or slowing down of the biological cycles, they are unable to defend themselves. At that time, your normal DHT level is enough to attack or weaken the cells. That is why you are getting hair loss in normal DHT. ROS has got multiple roles in causing hair loss. The peri-infundibular lymphocytic filtration, perifollicular fibrosis, and injury to stem cell that occurs at the infundibulum so close to the dermis that this being caused by ROS is attributed to external factors. The ROS play a role in action of DHT and release of TGF-beta. DHT does direct act on the follicles. It causes the release of TGF-beta, which will miniaturize the follicle. And the release of TGF-beta occurs when a certain level of reactive oxygen species or ROS are accumulated in the cell. A free radical scavenger or antioxidants. So this is the role of antioxidants even directly in DHT. ROS are second messengers of various cytokines, growth factors. So oxidative stress, even inactive TGF that is bound to extracellular matrix around the follicle is released when there is accumulation of ROS. So ROS plays a role in multiple ways. Let's speak a little bit about stress. We believe stress causes hair loss. Stress causes hair loss in multiple ways. The neurotransmitters or neuropeptides and cytokines, they reduce the hair growth. Glucocorticoids released during stressful situations lead to cellular apoptosis, premature death of the cells. Stress increases desire for comfort foods. People feel like eating salty foods or sugar-based foods or high-fat foods during stress. This creates vitamin deficiencies, nutritional imbalances in the body. The stress hormones increase anxiety, they increase metabolic rate, they increase the requirement of antioxidants and minerals in the body. Stress inhibits vagus, increases gastric and intestinal mobility, leading to poor digestion and absorption. Chronic stress has been shown to have iron, magnesium, and nutritional deficiencies, and also deficiencies in the hair. This has been shown in studies. Lower hair mineral levels of calcium, magnesium, zinc, and calcium phosphorus ratio has been shown in human hair loss volunteers. Substance P is the mediator of stress, and substance P inhibits hair shaft elongation and pushes the follicles into catagen. And all these stress effects are mediated through ROS. The use of simple antioxidants and nutrients can fight the damage being caused by stress. So we have clinical trials on the various nutrient combinations that we have created. We have specific nutrient combinations even for specific conditions where certain nutrients required more. And these are given in a comprehensive synergistic cyclical therapy. That would be the topic of a different webinar. So I think the role of non-androgenic factors here, what all apart from DHT is acting on your hair follicles, is what we have tried to review today. Your comments and questions are welcome. We will call it a day, stop the webinar right here. Thank you. You can switch your mic. If you have some questions, have 10 minutes more, you can ask some questions. Since there is no active question being asked, let me just add similar factors as what we have discussed, the accumulation of ROS, and the imbalances and the slowing down also playing a role in PCOS. Oxidative stress, insulin resistance, and inflammation are the three basics that lead to polycystic ovarian syndrome or polycystic ovarian disease. PCOS may happen with or without hair loss, with or without acne, or without obesity. So that is another webinar that we would later on discuss. But have been able to create PCOS specific kits which will emphasize the role of nutrients in PCOS, which will give better control of the insulin resistance, the androgen levels, a better regulation of the cycles, and will improve the symptoms along with hair growth. That would be a separate webinar. We have not discussed about autophagy, apoptosis cycles, or many other things which require much details. Also, we have not discussed about specific role of nutrients in hair loss management, like vitamin D has got direct hair inductive capacity and influence on the dermal papilla cells. Then you have got low dose DLA omics, which acts against 5-reductase. It's a 5-reductase inhibitor, a precursor of prostaglandin 1, which is an anti-inflammatory prostaglandin. Fatty acids and polyphenols known to be anti-inflammatory. Arachidonic acid promotes multiplication of matrix cells and accelerates hair growth. Tocotrienol and tocopherol combination in 34% has improved hair counts by reducing lipid peroxidation and accumulation of free radicals created by lipid peroxidation. So there are specific nutrients. Zinc acts in multiple ways. It prevents apoptosis. It prevents the follicle from going into catagen. It promotes better energy. Zinc has got multiple benefits. Coenzyme Q10, vitamin A, they all have specific roles in hair loss management. And these nutrient deficiencies occur alone. So you cannot achieve hair growth by replacing just one nutrient because you find the deficiency of one nutrient and you want to restore it. When there is a clinical deficiency of one nutrient, means there is associated deficiency of other micronutrients. The system is failing. You can see only one. The others are being compensated. So always a balanced replacement or supply of these micronutrients is required to bring the function up. Single nutrient replacement or single nutrient responsibility for any happening in the body is a myth. You need a comprehensive replacement of nutrients, which will give rise to the best outcome. And when you come to comprehensive use of nutrients, you have to think of internutrient interactions. We think of drug interactions when we are giving two drugs together. We think of drug interactions when we are giving antibiotics. Why are we not thinking of internutrient interactions? There are internutrient interactions. There are various studies being done about this. And just by understanding them and improving the wellness or the biological function, the internal cellular environment of the cells, you can restore the function without having to fight it like a sickness or disease. Hair loss, not a sickness or disease. It's slowing down dysregulation or dysfunction of the cellular functions in the body. The hair growth cycles are getting dysregulated. So restoring the internal environment of the cells and repairing or restoring the cellular function is the answer, not fighting the DHT despite the DHT being normal. We are in an era of evidence-based medicine. Just think, where do you have the evidence of raised DHT to give DHT blockers? And that is the reason your DHT blockers and minoxidil are not working effectively in each and every patient. They sometimes work, they sometimes don't. but you combine it with low dose nutrition therapy or use the low dose nutrition therapy as a standalone, it works and it gives you 30 to 40% hair regrowth just within one telogen phase of 3 to 4 months. We are considering the telogen cycle because the aim of this therapy is to push the resting or the telogen follicles to come in the growth phase. That is how it works. So that's our parameter. We are considering the improvement every 2 months, and with 2 to 4 months, you can show 30% improvement in the hair caliber, improvement in the thickness, improvement in the density of the hair. If you have counted by folliscopy or trioscopy, the proportion of villus to terminal hair, you will find that the villus hair are getting converted to terminal hair. You also sometimes find new villus hair being generated. And micronutrients is like having food. Whatever micronutrient you provide today to the system is being used by the system. You want the system to function tomorrow, you need to provide the micronutrient again tomorrow. This is not like treating a sickness or disease. You have to give a course of 5 days antibiotics and your disease is treated. We have to come out of that kind of thinking. This is for wellness. And that is the reason we have created a program in which you give different micronutrients only 2 times a week, not 7 times a week, in the lowest possible dose. So if it is required to be continued for a longer time, this can be continued for any of time without any fear of side effects and without any fear of overdose. Because what is advised to be taken 7 times a week in the program comes 2 times a week. Limitations for micronutrients is what you are trying to do by giving the micronutrients 7 times a week. That is a limitation. It should not be done. It just causes wastage, overdose. Trying to use the micronutrients more efficiently is respecting the limitations and not going overboard with the micronutrients. If antioxidants in a particular dose are helpful, doesn't mean excess works better. The studies show that when these are used in higher doses, they become pro-oxidant. High doses of vitamin A interfere with keratinization and growth of the hair follicles. Vitamin C can interact and neutralize the effectiveness of vitamin B12. Vitamin E starts acting as an anticoagulant. Vitamin E is reducing circulating TSH levels, causing thyroid problems. And we have so many patients just popping vitamin E pills twice a day for no rhyme or reason. So because we have been naive about this and we look at the nutrients or the vitamins as just wellness and harmless products, we are abusing and overusing them. We should understand that if a vitamin or a nutrient taken changes something in your body, it is a drug. That is the new understanding of the Australian TGA. They treat everything that is consumed as a drug. And these drugs have got limitations, have got combinations that work better, have got combinations that do not go well with each other. That is what we are respecting in the therapy. You would like your patient to take the therapy for, say, like 4 months is one telogen cycle. So take it for like 7-8 months or 10 months. After that, if the hair is good, you can stop. There is nothing going to go wrong with the patient because you stop the therapy. This is not like taking medicine for diabetes, blood pressure, or illness to miss your diabetes and fall down. Nothing is going to happen. If you feel the hair is weak, you can strengthen the hair again, take the vitamins again. But if they are not taking vitamins from us, they are going to take some other vitamins and abuse them. So rather take them in a better cycle. That's the best answer. That's the way we convince our patients to hang on to the therapy. And a lot of patients stop it after 8 to 10 months. And 6 months down the line, 4 months down the line, if they feel the hair is weak, they can sit again. Premature graying is also mediated through reactive oxygen species. And whatever benefit, you cannot look for the benefit in premature graying or keratitis every time, but it could stop the progress, or in 50-50 chance that it will reverse the graying and will help in better hair growth. So I think we are reaching at the end of the webinar. Give suggestions on what kind of webinar you want or what kind of topic you want us to deal, and we'll try to do our best. I could not read all the questions that the input that came. I could catch a few of them and answer a few. The others we'll try to reply on our WhatsApp connections, on the WhatsApp groups. Very nice being all with you and having this uh, webinar too. Alopecia areata also improves with antioxidant nutrients. Though it's an autoimmune disease, you can hike up the immunity. You can also use immune kits in case of alopecia areata. So plan to see you, all of you again very soon.